So thanks very much for being here today. My name is Craig Sanderson. I work for a company called Infoblox, who you may be familiar with, traditionally known as doing DNS. But in the last dozen or so years, we spent time focused on DNS security, including protective DNS. In this session is around disrupting global scam networks using protective DNS. I'm thrilled to have one of my colleagues with me here today. I've got Cliff Wright. He's from our threat intelligence team, one of our directors. Through the threat intelligence he and his team developed, we're able to understand how these scam networks work and how we may possibly be able to disrupt what is now essentially industrial scale cybercrime. So obviously right now, in the role that I play, I work with governments and regulators around policy for cybersecurity, but that also includes fraud and scam. So working with regulators, working with ISPs, working with policymakers, fraud and cybercrime is now top of the agenda in most Western democracies. The challenge that we're facing is that we're now seeing industrial scale cybercrime. If you took the size of the global economy from a scam point of view, it would only be behind the United States and China in size. It's absolutely immense. On top of that problem is, if you look here in the UK, 20% of all crime is related to fraud. 2/3 of that is actually now cybercrime. It's actually cyber fraud. Those numbers are only increasing. So the traditional approach to fraud and crime is to go after perpetrators, but that simply is not possible. Prosecuting our way out of this problem is just not viable. The reason for that is a lot of the cybercrime and fraud that's operating on a global scale are operating out of scam compounds in countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. In those countries, the proceeds from cybercrime amount to about 46% of their GDP. Asking them to go after organizations that are generating that much money is simply not possible. We can't prosecute our way out of this. So what can we do? Well, protective DNS might be the way of dealing with it. So I've got a few questions for Cliff. He's got a few questions for me. So first question, Cliff, for those of you who looked at the session, we had a link to a report from the United Nations. And in that report, it highlighted how organized crime are actually using sponsorship of European sports teams as part of their operations, almost operating in plain sight. Maybe, Cliff, if you could talk about some of the background for that and how they're made to operate in such a level.
So I think one of the things that came out of that report, and it was really interesting, wasn't just the scale, but it was the legitimacy, how legitimate the scams actually looked. It's pretty bold, probably the boldest thing that I've seen so far in 20-something years of working in this industry, for scammers to go after, let's sponsor a European football team, let's sponsor some Premiership football teams. That's audacious, to say the least. So in being successful, though, it's paid off for them in a way, because they've ended up with this layer of credibility, this reputational armor, if you like. People see these brands on these football teams, and this is global business, world football is huge. So with that comes a level of, as I say, credibility that rubs off on regulators, victims, potential partners. They're not looking at scrutinizing these sponsors. They're actually just taking it at face value. DNS plays a big part in, I suppose, facilitating that as well, because domains can just be created at scale, built up and torn down at will. So there's a level of flexibility there, which means that the whole kind of scam ecosystem can really build and grow to the needs of the scammers.
But I think the interesting thing was, so I was also like a walking advertising hoarding for illegal Chinese gambling, because as a Crystal Palace fan, I was wearing a sort of like a football shirt, and on that football shirt was an basically illegal gambling company based out in the Far East. Now, of course, Crystal Palace were very happy to take the money, and they didn't really understand where this was coming from. But going back to the DNS part, their ability to actually manufacture almost a brand from scratch with it. They had their own payment system, they had their own crypto. And of course, by operating in what seems to be the legitimate economy, was a way for them to operate in plain sight, create holding companies, just like many other organizations would ordinarily do.
Exactly.
So it's not like the hacker in the hoodie. This is professional organized crime, essentially leveraging almost like the veneer of respectability through football team sponsorship. I mean, one of the things that was interesting was, so I'm not sure if anyone is a subscriber to The Economist, but Tulin Wong does a great podcast series called Scamming, talking about how in Southeast Asia, these criminal gangs are operating. I think one of the things that I found interesting about that is how the role of online gambling is playing in especially the laundering of the proceeds, but also in terms of how it's affecting society in Asia. Can you talk a bit about like some of the background of what was happening in Southeast Asia and like some of the tactics and tools that the threat actors are using?
Yeah. So what we're seeing in Southeast Asia with these scam compounds is really, it's kind of an industrial revolution of sorts. This is something that is, I mean, I've only really found out about it in the last few years myself, but I had no idea the scale of these compounds. They're actually the size of small towns, maybe even medium to large size towns at this point. And with that comes basically kind of integrated verticals of functionality that you'd expect with small corporations or even large enterprise. They have recruitment, they have training, they have scripters, they have vast numbers of people who are actually participating in the scams themselves. And unfortunately, a lot of these people are forced into it through human trafficking. So they're not short of manpower. And they've now, obviously taken the proceeds of illegal activity, reinvested that money back into the scam compounds to really build it out to be something of a machine. So I think that in itself is pretty interesting.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I found interesting was we're talking to one of your colleagues, John, who was looking into this. Is one of the ways they actually launder a lot of the money is that they turn out to be the world's worst gamblers. They go to a casino that's in on the operation. They accidentally lose a lot of money. And then on the back end, they kind of recover it back. So the fact that they have a very sophisticated financial system and how they're operating